Okay, by my watch, it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to get started. People are still joining us, and that's fine because we are recording. And what I can do is send out a replay to anybody who may miss the first few minutes because they're just still arriving. But I do want to be respectful of people's time and try and get this whole thing done in less than 1 hour. So, with that said, let's get started. And I'm going to share my screen here. And what you should be able to see now is my handsome face in the top right-hand corner. Hi there. And the scoring responses logo front and center. If for some reason that's not what you're seeing, let me know in the chat box. Shelly says yes. Okay, says Mike. Good. Okay, it looks like people are seeing what they're supposed to be seeing, which is a great start. So with that said, let's get going. Got a lot to cover. 6 easy steps to increasing your tournament's profitability. In other words, how to make your soccer tournament more profitable without having to add more teams, having to rent more fields, which of course is expense, having to hire more refs, which is always a challenge in this day and age, and without having to sell more T-shirts and other paraphernalia, which can sometimes be more work than it's worth. T-shirts are fine, but some of the other things people sell sometimes more trouble than they're worth. What we're really talking about here is a systematized approach to attracting more corporate support. And this is, without a doubt, in my opinion at least, the largest untapped revenue source in the entire soccer tournament industry, which is rather strange because so many other people do this very well. Other sporting events, certainly music festivals and arts festivals, all seem to do a much, much better job. But the tournament industry, the soccer tournament industry in particular, seems to really struggle with generating good, solid sponsor support. So hopefully we can put that right. You are in the right place if your tournament is otherwise successful. It attracts plenty of teams. It's a generally well-run event. People think highly of it, but you just can't seem to crack the code when it comes to securing corporate support. You're in the right place if you are frustrated that you're leaving big money on the table, but you don't have the expertise or the time or the confidence. And often those two things are interchangeable. Sometimes you say you don't have the time because you don't have the confidence. But you don't have the confidence to go out into the business community and ask for corporate support. You're in the right place if you're a tournament director who already has way too much to do and you've got so much on your plate, you need a quick and easy solution, preferably one that can be handed off to somebody else. And you're in the right place if you have a handful of advertisers, and they probably are advertisers, not sponsors. And there's a difference. We'll talk about that. And you're looking for creative new ways to engage bigger sponsors so that you can generate more revenue. So, on the other hand, if you have any of these things, you are in the wrong place. You're in the wrong place if your soccer tournament is brand new, you don't attract enough teams, and you want corporate sponsorships to cover your cash shortfalls. It's not a great place to be. I've been there. It's the where broke. So do you want to sponsor us kind of business model? And I used to sell sponsorships for a professional soccer team, semi-professional soccer team back in the 90s. And we used to operate under that business model. And it was tough. It was a very, very difficult place to begin having conversations with sponsors. Even if you didn't go into the meetings and tell them that you're broke, they still pretty soon figured it out. So you're in the wrong place if you want the revenue that comes with corporate sponsorships, but all you really want to offer in exchange is a logo here and there or an ad somewhere is not really enough to call that a sponsorship anymore. The industry has gotten more sophisticated. People have higher expectations. You're in the wrong place if you don't have any capacity to service sponsors. We all know these tournaments that are just run on an absolute bare bones infrastructure. You don't have enough volunteers. You got a tournament director running around like a headless chicken, and the last thing you really need to do is pile a whole bunch of deliverables on top of this tournament director's to-do list so that they can meet the needs of sponsors. So if that's you, then you're not really in the right place. But I would like you to think a little bit about what your tournament might look like if every small and medium-sized business knew all about your tournament, respected you for what it is you do for the local economy, and they wanted to do all they could to help you succeed. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Several large global brands sponsored your event, adding prestige to the tournament that you run. What would your tournament look like if your tournament had thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of dollars in additional revenue without having to increase the number of teams or fields or refs and all those things we talked about earlier? What would it look like if all of the corporate relationships operated on a win-win-win basis? And this is the new mantra when it comes to sponsorships. It used to be enough that people would just say the sponsor wins because they get attention and exposure, and the property, the tournament, wins because they get cash and or trade of services and products. But now there's a new mantra that there's a third constituency here. The attendees at your event, are they winning? Are they getting an experiential marketing experience that they enjoy, rather than just being bombarded with unwelcome advertising messages throughout their event? Are they getting something that is fun, engaging, and something they enjoy doing? So a win-win-win basis. And what would your tournament look like if your sponsors were so happy with their involvement that renewals were virtually automatic year on year? And that's what we're hoping that we can help you accomplish here. So here's what we're going to go over. We're going to do the 6 easy steps that any tournament can take to boost their sponsorship revenue. And I really do mean any tournament, not just the big fish, so to speak. The 3 types of corporate support and how recognizing the differences between them can have a huge impact on your productivity as someone selling the tournament sponsorships, and also on the overall success of the program itself. How to pitch your offer to each category, because the pitches are different depending on which category we're talking about, and that will maximize your chances of success. And the surefire system for making sure that all sponsors are happy and almost guaranteed to renew. So stay to the end. We're going to set you up with a subscription to Tournament Director Magazine if you stay all the way through to the end. And that's a new magazine. We're very proud of it. It's long been my belief that the industry needs its own trade magazine. I've got a background in magazine publishing, so we put together this digital magazine, and we're working on the next issue right now. And I'd like nothing more than to set you up with a subscription to that. So stay to the end and we'll take care of that. So does this sound like you? You know there's sponsorship revenue out there. You've never really sold sponsorships though, and you don't know where to start. You just really don't have a clue where to even begin on selling sponsorships. Maybe you've never put together a sponsorship proposal. You have no idea what's included in a proposal like that, how to pitch it, or how much to charge even. Maybe you think it's hard enough to find people to do simple jobs like field marshal or trash collection or manning the concession stand, let alone finding someone who could do the more difficult task of selling sponsorships. And it's a fair point. You know, it's not easy, but it's something that can be done if you find the right person, but it's not easy. And you maybe think that even if you were able to sell sponsorships, you're not sure how you're even going to handle deliverables because there's already too much on your plate and you don't have anybody else to do it. The good news is it's not your fault. There is a tendency among the people who actually host these events, the clubs and the organizations that host the event, to believe erroneously that someone who's good at running a tournament is also going to be good at selling sponsorships. I think that's a mistake because the skill sets required to run a successful tournament are very different from the skill sets required to set up a good sponsorship. And I've done both. I've not run a tournament per se from soup to nuts, but I've run professional soccer events, and I used to be the guy that would lie awake at night wondering if the fields had been lined properly or if the ice was ordered or whatever. I'm much, much more comfortable dealing with the creative outside the box thinking of putting together a creative sponsorship idea. And I'm not terribly good at all the detail oriented stuff that's involved in running a tournament. Most tournament directors are very, very good at that. They have checklists and they scratch things off their checklist as they get done. They make sure all the details are covered. That's their job. That's their zone of genius, if you will. And very often the skills required and even the personality type required to be successful at sponsorships is very different from that of being a successful tournament director. And they neither had the time nor the experience to bring in sponsors. And frankly, if they did spend a lot of time bringing in sponsors or trying to bring in sponsors, it would take away from their zone of genius, from their tasks that they are good at, which is taking care of running a successful event. And most nonprofit organizations like the money that comes with sponsorships, but they don't have any of the things in place to actually handle successful sponsor relationships, either at the sales end or at the deliverables end. So it's not your fault. It's something that is quite endemic to this industry. And there's more good news because with just a simple shift of thinking, it's quite easy to sell sponsorships if you know what you're doing and if you have the right skill set to do it. Selling sponsorships is not as hard as most people think. And it's just a small shift in mindset along with a system, an easy to follow system, could turn sponsorships into the second largest revenue stream of your tournament behind just team registrations. So it's really worth looking into. It's really worth putting the work and the effort into trying to crack the code on this, because there's a lot of dollars on the table that are not being collected at the moment. All you really need is a good understanding of what it is you're offering, which really boils down to your audience and your inventory, a clear and focused prospect list. In fact, you need 3, and we'll talk about why 3 and what those 3 are. A system for reaching out to those prospects and making the right offers to the right prospects. Again, the offer is different depending on which category of prospect we're talking about. A process for delivering what it is you promised, and a follow-up sequence to show sponsors that you've delivered what you promised them and to secure renewals. So those are all the things you need. And that small change in mindset is this. It's very simple. You just need to believe it can be done, because there are literally thousands of event organizers around, all around the world, who are literally collectively raising billions of dollars in sponsorships every single year. And that's particularly true in the sports space. We all know this, right? We watch sports on TV, and we see all the sponsor logos everywhere, signs around the outside of the field, badges and labels on people's uniforms. Look at a NASCAR driver. Sponsorships are everywhere in the sports space, and even in the very specific area of youth soccer sponsorships. Although I'm on the record as saying it's the biggest untapped revenue source out there, and I stand by that statement, there are people who are doing it very well. In fact, some people who are even on this presentation right now who do a fantastic job of selling sponsorships. So the question then becomes, if they can do it, your tournament can do it too. So let's talk a little bit about how you go about doing it. But it really can be done, and you just need to think differently about how it should be done and how it can be done. Let me tell you a little bit about me. Before I do that, let me take a sip of water. I won't spend a lot of time on this because no one likes talking about themselves, do they? But my name is Michael Jones, and I am a 25-year media and sponsorship sales veteran, probably more like 30 years now. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? But I've been doing this for a long, long time. I'm the co-founder and former general manager of the Cape Cod Crusaders, the Worcester Wildfire, and the Boston Renegades. So 3 semi-pro teams, 2 men's teams, 1 women's team. And we had some success with those teams. After that, I founded Soccer Tournament Guide, and in 2012, I started Game Day Mobile Marketing, which develops smartphone apps for the tournament industry. So I have a couple of businesses that service the tournament space. I am the current director of marketing for the Cape Cod Challenge Cup, which is my local tournament right here on Cape Cod. I'm reprising an old role. I used to have this role back when I was coaching and my children were in the program. Kids grew out of the program. I stopped doing it. Now I'm back. And I also do marketing for some tournaments in Dallas and in Austin, Texas, and some tournaments in the Los Angeles suburbs. So we really do handle quite a lot of tournaments. And here's how I got to be such an expert in sponsorship sales. I'll go through my life story in 5 slides or less. I promise it won't be a lengthy exercise. As you can tell, I'm British. I grew up, very ordinary childhood in England, nothing extraordinary about it, except as it pertains to this particular presentation, the one thing that did happen in 1968, I met the first true love of my life, which was Manchester United Football Club. Sent to me from heaven. Here's the story, very quickly. I was 5 years old. My mum had gone out because my dad wanted to watch the game, and my dad had some friends over. But the one caveat she said as she walked out the door was, you can have the house to yourself, but you got to put the kids to bed. And I was 5 years old. My sister was sound asleep in bed, but I didn't want to go to bed. And my dad, in one of his wiser parental moves, decided that, okay, if you don't want to go to bed, you can sit on my lap and you can watch the game. And I was probably asleep before halftime. You know how those things go. But nonetheless, Manchester United won 4-1 against Benfica. And I became a Manchester United fan on that very day, as was my father and as is my daughter. So it's a generational thing in this family. 1980s, I grew up. I got a crazy start to my career. I played in a rock and roll band. I tended bar. I was an accountant for a short time. I was in sales, did a bunch of different things. But eventually I found my way into the magazine industry, and I really did have a very satisfying and fun career in magazines. Started at Cosmopolitan in London, just above Carnaby Street in the West End of London. Great. But around about that time, I met and married the second great love of my life, my wife, who was American. So we moved to the United States, moved to Boston, Massachusetts, where I got a job working at the Atlantic Monthly. So staying in magazines, still really, really enjoying it. But at that time, I was starting to see that the folks that made real money in this industry were the ad reps. I was in the production department and doing fine, but the real money was being made by the folks who sold all the advertising. So I was starting to just pivot into that area, thinking, maybe I could do sales. I had a bit of sales experience when I had this brilliant idea. And it was to start a professional soccer team on Cape Cod, which seemed crazy. I mean, it was a crazy idea, but I just thought soccer was booming at the time. It was just starting to kick off after the 1994 World Cup. MLS was about to launch, and we decided, let's put a team on Cape Cod. And I wanted to call this team the Cape Crusaders, which I thought was a terrific name for a minor league sports team. We could have had a lot of fun with the whole Batman theme, but the guys I was in business with didn't want to do that. They wanted to call it the Cape Cod Crusaders because they said no one would know where we're from if we call it the Cape Crusaders. That's not true. Everyone here calls it the Cape. But nonetheless, we called it the Cape Cod Crusaders. Then we started another one called the Worcester Wildfire. And then we started a third one, which was a women's team called the Boston Renegades. And the Boston Renegades was actually probably the flagship team of the old W League. Before real professional women's soccer came to the United States, the W League was semi-pro, high-level amateur league, and we were probably the best run, best supported, highest crowds, biggest sponsorships of the entire W League. So that was my job for much of the 1990s. And it was really the start of my sales career, because most people think that if you're the general manager of a semi-pro team, you're going to be spending your time negotiating contracts with players, maybe having lunch with agents and dealing with all kinds of really highfalutin stuff in the sports space. But nonetheless, my number one job was to keep the lights on, find a way to bring money in, which basically meant I was selling. I was selling everything. I was not only selling camps and tickets and sponsorships, but I had a staff in each of those three areas. I had a camp director, a ticket rep, a couple of ticket reps, and sponsorships reps. And my job was to not just sell stuff, but to manage a sales team. So it was a very, very steep learning curve, and we really had to come up with some systems and some processes for getting this stuff done. I had some sales experience from London back in the day, but this was much, much more sophisticated sales process. So we did do, in the end, pretty well. We got 4 dealers of New England. I'll tell you about that deal in quite detail in a minute. We had Cliff Bar, which is based in Chelsea, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Ben & Jerry's, Coca-Cola. We had Pepsi-Cola over at the Renegades, while Coca-Cola was a sponsor of the Crusaders. We had McDonald's as a sponsor, a bunch of different corporate relationships, if you will. After that all ended, I got back into publishing and was the publisher of Soccer New England. And that's really when I got involved in the tournament space, because the bulk of the advertisers for this magazine were tournaments. Back in the days before the internet, well, before the internet was really ubiquitous as it is now, the best way to fill your tournament was to advertise in print media. So we were part of that. When we started putting together the inevitable soccernewengland.com, taking the magazine online, I had a brainstorm. I said, let's do 2 websites, not just one. Let's do soccertournamentguide.com as well, and tap into these advertisers and make it more national and global, because all the advertisers who were in Soccer New England were basically New England tournaments. We had a few from further south, Virginia and maybe even Florida once in a while, but most of the advertisers were local tournaments. Take it online and suddenly you're dealing with national and international tournaments, and that was a big, big step forward for us. So soccertournamentguide.com was a big step. Then we started developing tournament apps. We set up a company called Game Day Mobile Marketing, which does apps for a number of tournaments. And now we have the Tournament Director magazine, which I just explained to you. And we have the Tournament Talk community, which is a really fun thing. And you should join. If you're not a member, you should join. It's free of charge. It's on Facebook. It's just a collaborative Facebook group. All tournament directors asking each other for advice and pointers and tips. It's a really good community. You should be part of it if you're not already there. So, fair to say I know quite a bit about sports marketing and sponsorship sales, and that's how we got to here. So let's talk a little bit about those 6 easy steps. I said there were 6 easy steps. Let's go through them. 1, identify your audience. 2, create 3 separate prospect lists. There's 3, and I'll tell you why there's 3 and how you approach each one. Assess what inventory you have. Follow a system for reaching out to those prospects. Create a process for dealing with all of your deliverables. And then follow up for the debrief and renewals. So I'm going to go through these one by one. Some of them I'll go into some depth, but others, because of time, I'll do relatively brief introductions to what we do and how we tackle them. And again, a little sip of water. So let's identify your audience. The tough fact is that most people are not totally interested in your tournament. Okay, they're not totally interested in whether it's an elite tournament or a travel tournament or a rec tournament. They're really only interested in one thing, and that is the audience. Okay, that is all the people who come to your tournament. It's not just about the children who play, it's the everybody, whether it's siblings, parents, coaches, grandparents, whoever is coming to your event. That is what these sponsors are buying, and access to that audience is the key. So it behooves you to learn as much about the audience that's coming to your event as is humanly possible, so that you can pass that information on to your prospects in the hope that they will become sponsors. So that all begins with a well-constructed survey. The kind of information you're looking for is demographic information and psychographic information. Demographic is all about numbers, facts, and figures. Okay, how old are they? Male or female? What is their household income? Do they own their home or rent a home? Do they have college education? Do the children plan to go to college? Because there's a whole area of sponsorship opportunities in that scenario. Cars they drive, how many cars do they own, what kind of cars are they, have they come from a long distance away or are they local? That's all demographic information. Psychographic information is something a little bit more subtle. It's really how they feel about your event. It's less about numbers, facts, and figures, and more about how they feel. And this is where you can really sort of try and convey to your potential sponsors that your event is something special to these people. And therefore, by associating themselves with your event, they can be something special. We had this going for us on Cape Cod, and your tournament may have something similar. Cape Cod is known by the people in New England as a wonderful place to come and visit, a wonderful place. They've often got very happy childhood memories of vacations they spend here with their family. A lot of people have second homes here and spend all summer here. So Cape Cod has this lovely affinity. The audience has an affinity with Cape Cod, and that rubs off on the tournament. The fact that it's a fairly well-run tournament that's very popular is also helpful. So you combine Cape Cod with the fact that it's a well-run tournament, and you've got this wonderful glow that appears around this whole relationship between the audience and the event. So if you have something similar to that, or if you can find a way to tap into something similar to that, there's your psychographics, and that's something that's also very, very valuable to pass on to a sponsor. Number 2, create 3 prospect lists. Okay, let's talk about that very quickly. There are 3 kinds of corporate support. And before we get too much into this, let's do this. I've already clicked it. So let's do donors, advertisers, and sponsors. Those are the 3 types. But before we get too deep into this, I want to sort of stress that this is all internal communication. This is how we, inside the tournament and inside the sponsorship sales operation, refer to these people. But to the untrained outside eye, they may just look like 3 different levels of the same thing. They don't necessarily think of themselves as donors, advertisers, and sponsors. The outside world, the attendees at your event, don't necessarily see these as sponsors, advertisers, or donors. It's really just internal. It's just our language that we use to describe them. But it is important because how we approach them is different. I'm going to define each individual one, and we'll talk a little bit about how we approach them. Donors are people who will give you money because they like you and or they like what you stand for. Okay, so they like what you do for the local community or the local economy. Maybe the owner is just a soccer lover. They're a huge fan of the sport and they want to support you in any way. Maybe they have a child who plays in your program. They run a construction company or a plumbing company that maybe has some nebulous attachment to the audience you're looking for, but they're really more interested in the idea that their kid gets a lot out of being in your club, therefore they're happy to sponsor you. Okay, outreach and lead time are generally quite limited. Okay, so it's just usually a letter or some kind of email, followed up with a phone call, and then you stop by and pick up a check or take a credit card over the phone. The dollars are generally quite small. We work with some companies or some tournaments that sell their donor packages for as little as $100, usually somewhere between 100 and 500, something like that. And the deliverables are simple. It may just be a plaque at the end of the season saying thank you, or it may be a small ad in a printed yearbook or something like that. An advertiser will give you money because it makes sense for their business to be in front of your audience. Okay, so the kinds of people we're talking about here are restaurants and retail establishments and attractions that are in the area. So the pitch to them is, we've got 10,000 people coming into town next weekend. Would you like them to come, or some portion of them to come by your establishment and give business to you as a result of their being here and needing somewhere to eat or somewhere to shop or what have you? So the lead time's a little longer. It's not next weekend, I should add. That was a turn of phrase, but it's 6 to 10 weeks. They need a little bit more time to get ad copy together, maybe some promotional materials or stuff like that. But an advertiser doesn't need a whole ton of time. 6 to 10 weeks is enough. Dollars are a little larger. You're talking probably in the $500 to $1,000 range, and they will need to be justified. You need to go back to them at the end of the day and say, hey, here's the number of people who saw your ad. Here's the number of redemptions you got on your coupon, etc., etc. Outreach is a little more involved as well. You probably need to come up with some kind of a media kit that can be sent either printed or sent out as a PDF. You're probably going to need to have some one-on-one meetings, either in person or online via Skype. And deliverables may involve ads, field signs, coupons, promotions, or some combination thereof. There's a lot of good programs out there where they have an ad in the app, an ad in the yearbook, plus a field sign, all different price points, or you can bundle them all together as one discounted combo package, if you will. Definition of a sponsor. A sponsor will give you money because they want to connect in a meaningful way with your audience. So you've got donors who just like what you do. You've got advertisers who want to get in front of your audience. You've got sponsors who want to connect with your audience, okay? That's the difference. Healthcare, financial services, sporting goods, automotive. We're talking about bigger dollar amounts. You're looking at a longer lead time, several months. People generally need to decide whether or not they're going to be a sponsor. Very often you have to get in on a budgeting cycle. So for example, if you have a tournament that is, let's say Memorial Day, and you're talking to a sponsor that has a fiscal year that starts on October 1st, which is very common for healthcare providers here in Massachusetts. Most of the hospitals in this area have a fiscal year that begins October 1st. So you want to be talking to them before they finalize their budget, and yet you want to be talking to them in the year preceding your event. So your event is next Memorial Day. You want to be talking to them in July so that you can be in their budget and they can allocate the funds for you in that October 1st fiscal year, which probably is they're planning in July and August. Gives you some idea of lead times. And sometimes you can do two things. If you approach someone 2 months before an event and say, we want you to sponsor, which is very common in the tournament space. A lot of the tournaments will sort of shut up shop for 6 months of the year and not really start thinking about their tournament until several months out. You reach out to a sponsor, prospective sponsor, they may like the proposal, but they'll say, come back next year. And okay, make sure you do come back next year and talk to them about when you need to reach them to get into next year's budget. But what you've also done is this: you've perhaps given them a clue that you don't really know what you're doing. Because if you're reaching out to a sponsor 2-3 months before an event, they know that you don't really know that they need much, much longer than that. So it's something you want to be a little bit careful of. Dollars, generally much larger. We're talking thousands rather than hundreds, anywhere in the $2,500 to $5,000 range for the kinds of tournaments we typically work with. They're looking for things like category exclusivity, multi-year deals, which are both good and bad for you. They're definitely huge benefits to having multi-year deals, but they also come with some additional baggage. Outreach will involve a customized sponsorship proposal. We'll talk a little bit about sponsorship proposals in a moment. Plenty of research, at least one and maybe more face-to-face meetings. Again, maybe one-on-one, face-to-face, actual in person, but just as likely online via Skype or some other meeting software program. Far more complex, often multi-channel deliverables. Okay. So I'm going to take you through an example of a sponsorship just to give you some sense of why they're different from typical advertising packages. And this is one I put together when I was with the Crusaders, and it was with Ford Dealers of New England. So we had the Crusaders and we had the Wildfire in Worcester, and there were 6 teams total in New England, 4 more that we didn't own, one in Vermont, one in New Hampshire, one in Rhode Island, one in Connecticut. And we put together a deal because none of the teams had an exclusive deal with any car dealer. So we put together a deal with the Ford Dealers of New England. And it all began with an ad. And what had happened was I started to notice that Ford was running some ads in the local newspaper highlighting the safety of the Ford Windstar. And they had won some JD Power award for safety or something. I don't remember what it was, but they had won something and they were highlighting that. And I had an inspired moment where I came up with a tagline and an ad that to this day I still think is a really terrific tagline. Basically, it went, I got into soccer because of my kids. I get into a Windstar because of them too. And the idea was that this parent who hadn't played soccer when they were young, this was probably the last generation of parents that raised soccer playing children when they hadn't played soccer themselves. And they got into this sport for no other reason than because their kids loved it, but they also get into this Windstar because of all these great safety benefits that it had and all the features that were highlighted by this ad I saw. So we put an ad together, actually mocked it up, created the tagline, put an ad together. We put ads in all of their programs. We put field signs, 2 field signs behind each goal at all 6 venues. We had a booth at each venue. So one game a year of the season, the local dealer would come by to the field with a vehicle and some staff, and they would talk to our fans about the Ford Windstar and those safety benefits and all the things that make it a great vehicle for a young, growing family. And here's the kicker. People would have a chance to sign up for a contest. And at halftime, we'd wheel the vehicle onto the field and people could win the car. We set up a deal, an insurance program with a company called, what was their name? Hole in One Promotions. That's right. They do these specialty insurance programs for sporting events like the hole in one or the halftime shot at a basketball game, shoot the basket from halfway line, all those kinds of things you see. Well, if someone actually wins some crazy prize for doing those things, someone needs to foot the bill, and that's what this insurance policy was for. And they laid out all the rules. It had to be a random drawing. It had to be 25 feet away. And the idea was if you could kick a ball through the side window of a Ford Windstar from 25 yards away, you'd win it. So heck of a deal and a really good thing, but you had to sign up for it. And that's the key, because all those names and email addresses and phone numbers were then passed on to the client as someone they could follow up with a list of people who had shown enough interest in the Windstar to at least sign up for this contest. So that was a sponsorship that really worked very well. It was almost a $50,000 deal. I think it was $48,000. And we really put together a terrific program, and Ford was very, very happy with it. So carrying on with number 2 and how these prospect lists come together. You need to source your competition. Okay, it's never an easy job to sell someone on the idea of advertising if they don't already advertise. So always go after people who are already advertising in your competition. Now, what is your competition? Well, you're in the advertising and marketing space. So it's magazines, it's newspapers, it's radio, it's local TV, it's billboards. All of those people are running ads constantly, all those industries, if you will. And not only do you get ideas of who to reach out to because of who's advertising, but you get an idea of what to talk to them about because of what they're advertising. Very, very important. Pay attention to what they are saying in their ads. Just as I was paying attention and noticed that Ford Windstar was touting their safety features, that became the context of the conversation I had with them. There's all kinds of clues in the ads people are running as to what it is they're prioritizing in their marketing. Focus on people who already advertise. I already touched on this a moment ago, but I get frustrated. I used to particularly get frustrated when I was a sales manager, and I would look at people, my reps, people who worked for me, spinning their wheels, spending a whole lot of time trying to persuade someone who doesn't advertise that they should advertise. And that's never a good strategy. It's just such a waste of time. You are far better off trying to find someone who already advertises in other publications, billboards, and what have you, and getting them to allocate a small portion of that budget to you than you are trying to get someone who doesn't even have an advertising budget, probably doesn't even have a marketing director, and get them to advertise with you. So do bear that in mind. And pay attention to companies that sponsor other events that are similar to yours. What does similar to yours mean? It doesn't only mean other soccer tournaments. It doesn't even only mean other sporting events, although that's obviously a good place to start. Definitely look at who sponsors your local MLS team or your local, pro baseball team, if that's what you've got. But also pay attention to people who sponsor music events, sponsor art festivals, even dance recitals, any number of different public events in your community. The kinds of companies that sponsor them are always a great place to actually start putting that prospect list together, putting those prospect lists together, and definitely reach out to your parents. Your parents probably either run businesses of their own or know people who run businesses or know people who work for businesses and can at least give you the name of the marketing director of the company they work for. Just really put feelers out into your parent community to build out those prospect lists. So, assessing your inventory. My clicker's broken. All I have to do is go out and come back in again. Okay, so let's get creative. We can do all kinds of fun things when it comes to actually assessing our inventory. Take another little sip. Logo placements on websites. Of course, I said earlier, logo placements are nowhere near enough, and they're not. However, they are a good place to start. So where could you put someone's logo? Where could you put someone's ad? Where could you put someone's banner? On printed materials, you got a mobile app, you got a website, all those things. Ads. That's more than just a logo. That's an ad with an actual message in it. And again, mobile app, social media channels. How are your social media channels? Do you have a social media channel for your tournament, or do you just piggyback off the Facebook page that you have set up for your club? Not a great idea. Coaches' bags, we know about that. Content, articles, interviews, coupons, all those kinds of things. Field signs, banners, tents, golf carts, all those kinds of things. Booth space and promotions. This is where we start talking about sponsorships more than just advertisers. Having people be present at your event, having corporate presence at your event, either in a sampling space or a promotion at the field, maybe even online. There's a contest over social media, something like that. Special events outside of the field locations, including meetings, registrations, check-in. A lot of tournaments are going towards an online check-in process because it's more convenient for the coaches and the team managers, and that's very understandable. But that said, it's a missed opportunity because you can have a sponsor the check-in and make it something that generates revenue. Parties and entertainment. A lot of the big European tournaments have parties for their participants, and they're sponsored. Other perks include press releases. Category exclusivity is a perk, of course. Custom content, access to your audience before and after your event. So think year round. People who run many tournaments a year do think year round, but people who run one event a year tend to sort of shut up shop and not think about the tournament at critical times. For example, if you run a tournament on Memorial Day weekend, and you have a shopping mall as a sponsor, do you think that shopping mall would appreciate it if you sent some kind of an email out for Black Friday? Well, Black Friday is about as far away from Memorial Day as you can get on a calendar, but nonetheless, it's still a good thing to do. So think year round. How do you reach out to these prospects? Let's talk about that, because it varies depending on the kind of prospect they are, whether they're a donor, an advertiser, or a sponsor. So with donors, I like to send out a letter, sometimes an email, but I prefer a letter, an actual letter on paper with a stamp. We invite them to donate. We offer them something in exchange, whether it's a small ad in the yearbook or a plaque at the end of the year or something. Remind them of your nonprofit status, if indeed you have a nonprofit status, and what you do for the community. If you're not nonprofit, even if you're not, you still do something great for the community. So remind them of that. Advertisers are probably going to need something more. They're going to need some kind of a media kit. You can list your demographic information, what inventory you're offering, what prices, what packages you have. That's all put together in your outreach to advertisers. You may have to stop by or call to set up a meeting and offer this media kit in person. Again, the meeting can be either offline or online. And you can have spec ads created. Okay. And this is something, again, we did this for the Ford Dealers of New England. I didn't just come up with a tagline. I actually created the ad itself with a picture of a WinStar and nicely designed. So reaching out to sponsors is something altogether different. You need something much more elaborate. What you need is a fully customized sponsorship proposal. Okay. Two things you want to try and avoid. One is one of those gold, silver, and bronze menu type sponsorship packages where you sort of say, well, if you're gold, you get this much and it costs X. If you're silver, you get a little bit less and it costs a little bit less. That's not a great way to approach a sponsor. They want something a little bit more customized. And the other thing you've got to try and avoid is this cookie cutter approach where you go into the Word document and you use the find replace feature that they have in Word, and you find and replace every reference to Coca-Cola and you change it to, Cooperative Bank or something, and the sponsorship proposal remains exactly the same. All you do is change the name. You've got to be a little bit more creative than that. You've got to be a little bit more involved in, what are they looking for? What kinds of benefits are you offering that is going to fit with their marketing goals? And you need to have done some homework to know what those marketing goals are. But you don't need to panic. Although it needs to be customized and it mustn't be cookie cutter, it doesn't have to be created from the ground up every single time. You can create a blueprint, and as long as you change key parts of it and make each one unique, you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. Here is what you need to include, though, because I get this question all the time. What is actually included in a typical sponsorship proposal? So 5 key parts to it. One is an overview of your event, your mission, your audience, your demographics, your psychographics. And most of all, what does your event mean to your audience? We talked about that earlier, right? Visualization of the sponsorship. Where does the sponsor fit in? How does the sponsorship mesh with their key objectives? And more importantly, how does it match with your audience? Okay, here's a good example. Just recently on television, I watch TV like everybody, but I pay attention to the ads, unlike most people. And what I've seen is that Stop and Shop, and here in New England, Stop and Shop is the largest supermarket chain in the area. And they have been advertising Peapod. Peapod is their home delivery service. And they have been their ad is featuring a family that's just rushing around like crazy. They're going from one sports practice to next sports game, dance recital to music lessons, all the things that families do. And they're using that as a way to promote Peapod, which is their home delivery grocery service. You go online and order it online and they deliver it by, home delivery. Perfect match. And that's the sort of thing that I would put into a sponsorship proposal. I see you're doing this on TV. I notice your ads on this particular thing. Well, here's a picture of that ad, and here's a picture of how that fits in with our audience. Visualization of the sponsorship. Tournament specifics, hard numbers. How many people are coming? How many of them are parents, coaches, participants? All that stuff. What's your social media numbers? How many views do you have? How many likes you have on Facebook? All that good stuff. App. How many people are downloading your app if you have one? If you don't have one, you should have one. What kinds of printed materials are you putting out there, and what are the print runs on those printed materials? Marketing plans, exactly what it is you are offering to the sponsor. How many field signs? How many banners? Where is the logo going to be placed? What is the one big idea that you bring to the table that will make the sponsorship fly? And this is something that most people find puzzling. They think that the marketing department must have tons of ideas of what they want to do with their marketing. But the truth is they don't. And they didn't even think of sponsoring your event until you called them up and asked them to sponsor your event. So it's not like they've got a plan waiting in the top drawer. Oh yeah, when Jen calls, I'll bring this out, and we'll bring that out just for the soccer tournament. They're not thinking that way. You have to do that thinking for them. Investment, what is the cash portion? How much of it in kind? What are the payment terms? All that good stuff. So those are the 5 key ingredients of a good sponsorship proposal. There'll be other things. There'll be logos. There'll be images. There'll be all kinds of other good stuff, maybe some testimonials. But those are the 5 key ingredients that you need to include. Okay, so number 5 of the 6 is handling deliverables. You need to have one volunteer and or staffer who is specifically charged with handling all of the deliverables. And here's the interesting thing about that person. They need to be highly detail oriented. They need to be great at putting checklists together and above all crossing items off that checklist. In short, they need to be just the kind of person that we just described earlier that makes a great tournament director. But here's the thing. That person must not be the actual tournament director. You cannot put more and more stuff onto your tournament director's list. Even though the actual skill sets and personality types are very similar, you need to have essentially a clone of your tournament director to handle your deliverables. If you put them all on the list of the tournament director themselves, you're going to come a cropper and you're going to find a whole bunch of things don't get done because the tournament director already has way too much to do. Every proposal and agreement and every promise made, because sometimes promises are made in meetings that are just there to close the deal. They weren't part of the proposal. They just got, oh yeah, we'll take care of that. Don't worry. We'll put that in as well. Throw that in just to close the deal. So make sure all of that stuff gets bundled up and handed to this person. And that person has to put a spreadsheet together. And I can share some with you of people who do this very, very well. But basically the spreadsheet becomes your Bible of outlining every detail of every sponsorship, all the to-dos, all the deliverables. You need to have every sponsor contact in hand, not just the sponsors themselves, not just the marketing director who said yes and signed off on the deal, but who's that marketing director's personal assistant? Who's that marketing director's art director? Who's handling the logos? Who's the printer? Who's going to handle the field signs and the coupons and all that good stuff? That person, your deliverable person, your one person who's in charge of this stuff, needs to have a contact list of all of these key people who are going to be getting that stuff to you, and they need to have deadlines so that they get the stuff to you on time. And then of course just execute, and that person is responsible for making sure that the execution goes ahead. Debrief and renewals. Here's your final one of the 6 we talked about. This part usually gets forgotten, or just as bad, the debrief happens, but that's the first time the sponsors actually heard from you since the day they signed the agreement. So you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be, here's the agreement, where's the check? Okay, I'll see you in 6 months. You want to make sure there's a regular connection between them. But at the end of the tournament, when it's all over, you do need to put together some kind of a report. Again, this depends on what category we're dealing with. For donors, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a gift and a thank you note detailing how successful the event was. Thanks to you, thanks to our sponsors and people who supported us. Advertisers are going to want a little more. They're going to want some info about numbers, website visits, app downloads, all the good stuff. And sponsors, what you need is a fully customized line-by-line debrief. You need photos, you may need videos, you need all kinds of stuff that sort of shows that we had this agreement. Here's the things that were in the agreement. Here's the things we did. Do they match? Do hopefully some of the things we delivered actually exceeded what we promised that we would deliver? If they don't even match up to what you promised, there needs to be an explanation as to why, and maybe some kind of makeup as to providing additional benefits elsewhere if you didn't give them what they expected. And renewals, again, it depends very much on what kind of support we're talking about, donors, advertisers, or sponsors. Sponsors or donors typically won't make any more than a token verbal commitment. Sure, we'd love to support you. Call us next year. We'll give it some thought. Advertisers, some will commit to multi-year deals, particularly if there's expense involved. If they have to get signs made up or certain different materials, it makes sense. Once they've made them, next year's event will be just the actual cost of the space rather than the cost of the materials. So they might make some sense. And if your tournament is growing, you might be able to get people to commit to a longer term deal simply by saying, look, it's going to be more expensive next year, but we'll grandfather you in at this price if you sign an extension before a certain date. So lock those in at lower prices, and then you might be able to get them to sign up. Smaller advertisers are going to be just like donors. They're going to balk a little bit at having to make any kind of long-term commitment, but they'll be very supportive and say, call us up next year, and if we got the money in our budget, we'll be happy to support you again. Sponsors, we recommend for all sponsorships a 3-year agreement, and they automatically annually renew, but you've got a get out clause if things aren't going well or if someone changes their mind. You don't want to chain people to a sponsorship they don't want to be part of anymore. On the other hand, if they do exercise that get out clause, you want to make sure they exercise it by a certain date. So again, let's talk about a tournament that takes place on Memorial Day weekend. You've got a 3-year deal and they've got a get out clause if they're not happy. But what you want to try and do is create a situation where if they want out, they need to let you know no later than September 1st. And that, particularly if they've got category exclusivity, because you don't have any other car dealers. They're the only car dealer you have. They don't want to continue next year because the marketing director's resigned and a new person is in and they don't have the same priorities. So they have to exercise that get out clause no later than, say, September 1st. That gives you the entire fall to reach out to other car dealers and get on their budget for their fiscal year, which starts on January 1, for your tournament that starts on Memorial Day weekend. So that's the kind of timeline you need to be thinking of when it comes to renewals or exercising get out clauses and things like that. Key is to decide if they're not going to renew, you need to know that as soon as possible. Okay. So I did say we would discuss certain things, and let's just make sure I've covered them all. 6 easy steps that you can take. We went through that. 3 types of corporate support. We went through that. How to pitch to each of those different categories. We talked about that. The surefire system for making sure that all sponsors are happy and almost guaranteed to renew. We talked about that. So I want you to remember that nothing here is fluff or theory. This is stuff I do. This is stuff that people in this industry do day in and day out. It's a tried and tested process for generating sponsorships at thousands, maybe tens of thousands, depending on the size of your tournament, to your event's bottom line. And it doesn't matter if you're new. It doesn't matter if you're strapped for time or totally freaked out by the idea of selling. This is something that anyone can do. And when you do it, you will have more revenue to fund your programs and your mission. You will have prestige from being associated with well-known brands, well-known in the community for the local and regional companies, and well-known brands, even global brands, supporting your event. You're going to have a whole lot less stress because you know that the cost of running your event and your club are covered, at least in part, by sponsorship revenue. And you'll have, of course, the ability to impact more people, which is really what you do this for, right? So I'm not sure why you came here today, but it's probably because you're frustrated that you're leaving money on the table when it comes to sponsorships. Or maybe it could be that you know you should be selling more sponsorships, but you feel intimidated and you don't have the confidence to go out there and interact with the local business community. Maybe you're considering bringing someone in, a third party, but you need to have some idea of how it's done so that you can train them and or manage them and know that they're not pulling the wool over your eyes because you don't know anything about this. Or maybe you've just noticed other tournaments doing so well and you're just a little bit jealous. You say, hey, if they're doing it, why can't we do it? But one thing I can say, you've stayed here long enough and we're now well over 50 minutes. So clearly you are serious about upping your game in this area of tournament sponsorships. So if that is the case, if that's something that we think we might be able to help you with. So let's talk a little bit about next steps, because this is where this presentation goes a little bit in a slightly different direction. We came up with an online training course called Scoring Responses. And it seemed like a really good idea. Clearly, there's a need in this market for some help in this area. And we thought that we could take all the stuff I've just gone through in this webinar, put it together in an online course, only going into much, much more detail, and put together 6 modules, just like the ones I went through, the 6 steps: audience, prospects, inventory and pricing, selling, onboarding and deliverables, debrief and renewals. The whole thing was sort of mapped out as an online course that people could buy, and really for a relatively small investment, $500 or 3 monthly payments of $200 or whatever. And it would be a really, really good deal. But we did something. A funny thing happened as we were sort of prepping this presentation to pitch this online course. I decided to send out one last email to the audience. And we've got about 2,000 some people, tournament directors, on our email list. And we sent something out saying, what is the biggest challenge you face when it comes to running your tournament and selling sponsorships? All I really wanted was some feedback and some additional ideas for things to make sure we covered it in the webinar, right? We just wanted to make sure that all the questions that people might have could be answered in this online presentation. But the biggest question that came back, we got a lot of responses, and the biggest challenge that people came back with is, we don't have anyone with either the time or the expertise or the inclination to sell sponsorships. We just don't have anyone. So being an entrepreneur at heart, I thought, ooh, is the market trying to tell me something? Is this something I should be listening to? So when we put our final offer together, the final slides, which I'll show you in a few minutes, for this webinar, I decided to put out a trial balloon. So in addition to the online course single pay option, $497, in addition to the online course monthly installment option of $197, we put a third option out there. We'll do a done with you option for a retainer plus a commission. I have a staff here. We've been selling ads on our website, email marketing campaigns through the website, tournament apps, ads in magazines. We've been selling stuff for years, for 10 years. And the idea that me and my staff could give you a helping hand with selling these sponsorships if you need it suddenly struck me as being something we should explore. So we put it out there. We put the final slide of the webinar together, and we put these 3 options out there. And here's what happened. Within 24 hours, we had our first 3 clients. 24 hours. And right from those first 3 clients, we were now selling sponsorships for 15 tournaments. Our local tournament here in the Boston area, Dallas, Austin in Texas, and Los Angeles. And we were also having serious conversations with at least 2 other tournaments, and now 3 or 4 other tournaments, who have approached us about selling sponsorships for them. So clearly there is a real need for someone to do this. So much so that I'm thinking of hiring some new staff and really repositioning the entire company around potentially offering scoring responses, done with you representation. So let's talk a little bit about what that is, because it may be something that's useful to you. For a limited, and I really mean limited number of select tournaments, and select is a key word too, we'll talk about that in a minute, we might be willing to sell sponsorships for you, or more accurately, with you. We'll do the survey. We can just customize the template we have for your event, and you can send it out. We'll put together all your intro deck, your media kit, and other sales materials together. We'll set up your social media accounts if you don't already have them. We'll work with you to put together those 3 prospect lists. We'll really need to work with you on that. That's something you're going to have to put a lot of work into at your end as much as we do. We'll also build an app for you if you don't already have one, or we might publish a yearbook if that's a better way to go. I've got a background in magazine publishing. There's costs to both, so it's something that you'll have to decide whether you want to do, but it's something that we'll happily do for you if you feel that that's an investment you want to make. We'll make the cold calls, and we'll set up the online meetings. We'll build relationships, and that's the key. It's building relationships with people. Sometimes they're very long-term relationships before you actually see a return, but nonetheless, that's what you have to do. We'll build the sponsorship proposals. We'll put together the agreements. We'll take care of the invoicing. We'll set up the onboarding process so the tournaments, the sponsors, I should say, know what's next. They don't just sign an agreement, hand over a check, and see you in 6 months kind of package. Just as I was getting through here we go. We'll liaise with your designated point person on all deliverables. That's key. You've got to have a point person that we can work with at your end. And we'll work with that person on debrief reports so that we can secure the renewals for the following year. In short, we'll set up an entire sponsorship program with you. Okay, we'll become your consultants, your experts, if you will, and your feet on the ground for putting that together. And I really do mean with you, not for you. It's not a done for you program. It's a done with you program. So let's just spend one slide talking about what that means. Done with you means it has to be a partnership, and it has to probably be a long-term one. Okay, we're not talking about coming in for 3 months because you happen to have a tournament in the summer, you need us to come in and do a quick hit on sponsorship sales. That's not how this works. You have to be our eyes and ears in the local market. You're the one who's driving down the highway past the big billboard, not me. You need to tell me if the local hospital suddenly started advertising their orthopedics department. You have to tell me a little bit about some of the major brands who are advertising on TV in your market or on radio. You'll need to help us with those 3 prospect lists. I cannot stress that enough. Reach out to your parents. We've got a standard letter that we send out to parents. We've got a video that we explain the difference between donors, advertisers, and sponsors, and we expect the parents and you and your staff to come to us with lists. Not that we can't do any of that ourselves. Of course, we can Google with the best of them, but it's so much quicker and easier if you give us some real serious help in that department. And then we'll definitely use our contacts in the industry as well. And you'll need to be committed to making sure these deliverables actually get delivered. That's absolutely critical. My reputation is on the line if I'm selling sponsorships. And if you don't get them delivered, then I'm going to end up with egg on my face. That's not going to be very comfortable for me. So there are some selection criteria, and we need to quickly go through that. We can help you if you have tournaments that attract at least 500 teams. It could be one event that attracts that number or more, or it could be perhaps 2 or 3 events over the course of the year that accumulatively attracts that number of teams, maybe 200 or 300 teams per tournament, 3 tournaments a year, what have you. But that's the kind of numbers we need to be talking about, because sponsors do appreciate numbers. They're looking to reach large numbers of people. You have to have been around for quite a few years. I don't really want to be dealing with rookie tournaments that don't really know how successful they're ever going to be, don't really have all of their infrastructure set up yet. And truthfully, if you're going to have 500 team tournaments, it takes a while to get to that level. It's not going to happen overnight. So hopefully you've been around for a few years. You need to be located in one of the top 50 US markets, media markets. There's a list of them online. I've got a list of them on my desk. We already work in Boston, Dallas, Los Angeles. We're having serious conversations with a group in New York, in the suburbs of New York. These are the kind of markets that tournaments or the advertisers and sponsors want. And truthfully, it's the kind of market where a package that comes to several $1,000s is not necessarily going to be horrifying to someone. I don't want to spend 3 months chasing down a sponsor in some tiny town in Iowa where radio spots sell for 30 bucks a 30-second spot, and then we put a package together that is several $1,000s or even $1,000, and they fall off their chair because they've just never seen anything that expensive before. That's not the kind of market we want to be working in on sponsorships, because it's just so much work to pin these people down. To put a $200 deal together, it's not worth it. You have to have enough control over your facilities to meet sponsor needs. Now, that's not to say that we're going to be going out there and selling tobacco sponsorships when you play in a high school. That's not what we're talking about. But you've got to have access to a facility where there aren't restrictions on having tents or sampling opportunities of, the appropriate products. We don't want to have situations where we promise to sponsor a certain thing only to find that the rental agreement you have with the town or the rec department prohibits us from doing those kinds of things. And you have to be able to dedicate at least one person to handle all the deliverables, because again, I'm out there selling, my staff is out there selling, and we're not going to be able to do that if we don't have 100% confidence that the deliverables are going to be taken care of. Okay. So with all that said, imagine if generating sponsorships was a systematized, effortless process run for you by a team of experienced sports marketing professionals. Wouldn't that be cool? If the local business community was lining up to support your event, perhaps even calling you or calling us, or calling you and you pass them on to us, which is what's happening with our current crop of clients. If you didn't have to constantly worry about how to increase the number of teams because you have other substantial revenue streams in the form of sponsor dollars, if multi-year agreements and high renewal rates meant you could actually predict future revenue year on year, wouldn't that be cool? So what's it all going to cost? We do have to talk a little bit about costs, right? You could try bringing in a volunteer. We had one conversation with a tournament that was going to bring in an intern and run them through our course. And that's fine, except that they're going to be inexperienced. You're probably going to pay them commission only. And without proper training and oversight and without some experience, you're probably not going to have great results. Here's the irony. Sometimes you hit a home run. We hired a young guy when we were running the Crusaders who actually did come in and set up a few deals for us. And we were very happy. But very quickly after that, he realized he could make much more money. He left us to go and do advertising sales for NBC Sports. Of course, you couldn't begrudge him that. That's a great career opportunity for him. But that's perhaps what would happen if you do find someone who actually is quite good. They won't stay long because, let's face it, there's lots of opportunity out there. You could muddle through with sponsors forever staying on the tournament director's to-do list. And we all know what happens, right? That's what's been happening for several years up to this point. It doesn't get done because the tournament director already has too much to do. So you end up there paying a huge opportunity cost of yet another cycle goes by and yet another year when thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars are left on the table because you didn't get around to putting together a sponsorship program. So those are the costs. So the question might actually better be said, what is the cost for not doing this? That is something you want to factor in to your discussions on this topic. But can't go any further without actually letting you know what the numbers are. So we will do this for you for a retainer of $497 per month. Okay. And then on top of that, a 25% commission on all sales. So bear that in mind. That is basically hiring an experienced, qualified sponsorship rep for $6,000 a year, less than, and commissions, of course, on top of that. But nonetheless, a relatively safe investment. If we can't generate enough money to cover that cost, then we shouldn't be in this business. That is something that I think for the kinds of tournaments we're talking about, that is a very affordable way to get into the sponsorship space and actually start setting all this stuff up. We do want it to be a long-term commitment. We do actually have an agreement that we'll send you, and you can have an idea of what it is we're signing up for. But there are get-out clauses, just like any agreement, and it's not something you're going to be tied to, wishing you weren't tied to. But at the same time, we do want some kind of a commitment from you. So here's what to do. Go to scoringwithsponsors.com. And what you'll see there is a sales page, which actually is as much about the online course that I told you about as it is about this. But the online course is closed for enrollment right now. We're not actually taking any more students for the time being. So the only one that we're really interested in, scroll all the way down to the bottom and you'll see this, but the only one we're interested in is the one on the far right. It is the $497. Plus a 25% commission. And it is an application. It is not something where you sort of say, oh yeah, we're in, let's do it. You have to apply. We'll have a phone conversation. We'll talk about your tournament. We'll talk about your needs. We'll see if we get along, because no one wants to get into a relationship where we just don't like each other. That's obviously no fun. So let's have that conversation. Of course, if we decide it's not a good fit, we will, of course, refund the $497. But first, we do need to make sure that you're serious by asking you to pay that as a deposit, if you will. If we agree that it's a good fit and we are going to move forward, then that becomes your first payment and you get charged that every month thereafter. We put the deals together. We charge you a commission. The cash comes to you. So we put the bill invoice together. The check is mailed to you guys. As soon as you get it, you get 5 days to turn it around and send it to us, our commission part. So that's how that works. And if it's a good fit, if it's something that you want as much as we want to work with you, then I think we can help you with this, and we could potentially really start to figure out and seriously challenge the notion that soccer tournaments don't do well in sponsorships. I believe they can, I believe they should, and I believe we can actually make that happen quite effectively for a number of tournaments if they meet the criteria I laid out. So go on to scoringwithsponsors.com, fill out the form, and let's have a conversation and see if there's something there that we can talk about. With all that said, I did want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. I've got a handful of questions that were pre-submitted. As I mentioned, I'd sent out this questionnaire to people before I put this webinar together. And I do have some questions here. If you have any questions, put them into the chat box. I'll get through them. I'm going to give it 5 minutes because I've already gone way over the hour, which was not my intention. But I'll go through a couple of these. If some questions come in that I don't get to before time's up, don't worry. I'll privately email you any answers. And of course, if we do end up having a conversation, then we'll answer every question you have. But let me just run a couple of these because there are some interesting ones here that are relevant to this conversation. I've got Lee who's saying he's having trouble getting parents motivated to find sponsors, even though those sponsorships would benefit their child's own team. Lee, I've got to tell you, if you're counting on parents to do this for you, I've got to tell you, I think that's going to be a bad move. You've got to sort of get out of this notion that parents are the be all and end all of everything, and that all you got to do is crack the whip a little harder, make them feel even more guilty than they do already, and they will go out and sell your sponsorships for you. Selling sponsorship is a job for the pros. It's not something to be just done lightly. Your parents might be able to pick up the odd $100, $200 donation, but that's not what we're talking about here. Parents are great for giving you names and contact info. They're really, really good for pointing us in the right direction. But the actual calls and the actual relationships should be built over time with potential prospects by someone who knows what they're doing and someone who has signed on to do exactly that, not some already frazzled parent who's got too much to do already. I've got one here from Mitch. Their challenge, he says, is that they have multiple sites for their events. Sponsors prefer one super complex of 25 fields or more, and our largest complex is only in the 13 to 18 field range, and we have many others that are smaller. I got to say, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. There are people on this very call, actually, who have tournaments that run on multiple events, and they do a fantastic job of putting great sponsorship packages together. 13 to 18 fields in sponsor language is a big complex. And yeah, the smaller complexes where you maybe have fewer games, you can either ignore them totally and only have all your sponsorships focused and concentrated on the one large facility, or if there are several large facilities where you've got 18 to 13 to 18 fields in 2 or 3 different locations, you could have your sponsors be at all 3 of them, and maybe even charge a premium for the extra exposure, so to speak. But there's no evidence in my background that suggests that having multiple locations is detrimental to sponsorship. You just have to pitch it properly and let them know what they're getting. But more importantly, build things that go beyond just the event itself. We talked about social media. We talked about putting email broadcasts out 6 months after the event is ended. You still have access to that audience. You still have access to those people. You've got an app, hopefully. All of these things are ways that you can reach out to your audience and reach out on behalf of your sponsor to that audience that have nothing to do with this, the number of fields you have at a particular complex. Last question here. Let's just give it one more. Here's one from Mike, and he says, biggest challenge is finding the right companies for our target market, i.e. companies who would find an audience of girls youth soccer players and parents attractive enough to invest money in. Mike, if you're struggling to find companies that find the youth soccer market attractive, you and I should talk, buddy. There's no doubt that the youth soccer market is a very attractive audience. We are talking about fairly affluent suburban families, usually college educated. I believe I saw somewhere recently the average household income of a soccer playing family is $115,000. They often have their own home. They're often college educated. The children are often on their way to becoming college educated. They are a terrific demographic for all manner of different advertisers and sponsors. So it's a great market. It's something that if you're struggling to find companies that want to reach this market, then we should talk, because there's plenty of companies out there that would give their right arm to reach this market. So there are 1 or 2 other questions coming in, but guys, I did say I'd do this in an hour, and we're now at 1 hour and 11 minutes. And I will answer people's questions by email privately, but more to the point, if you think that you would like us to actually step up and become your representative to the marketplace, reach out to some of the people we're already working with, reach out to people in your own market that you point us in the direction of. Fill out that form at the scoringwithsponsors.com website. Let's have a conversation. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a natural fit. But if it is a good fit and a mutually beneficial one, there's no reason why you shouldn't join this growing stable of clients that we have for whom we sell sponsorships. So give that some consideration. Come and join us if you like. Put the application in and let's see if this is a good fit. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me, and good luck. And hopefully, whether you work with us or not, you'll be able to take what I've given you tonight and turn it into something that will bring more sponsorships in for your tournament. So thanks very much. Appreciate it.